He forbade his wife to touch him in public, but seeing her smile with another man drove him mad. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let us return to our story. He forbade his wife to touch him in public, but seeing her smile with another man drove him mad. The rain came down steady that afternoon, painting long streaks across the glass walls of the high-rise office. Inside, everything was spotless, quiet, and cold, just like him. Alexander Reed, 36 billionaire CEO of Reed Global Holdings, stood behind his mahogany desk, staring at the contract lying open before him. His tie was loosened, but not a single crease on his suit betrayed carelessness. Every movement, every word that came out of him was calculated. Across from him sat Claire Evans, a woman whose entire life had been turned upside down in 1 week. Her father's medical bills were piling higher than the ceiling of her small apartment. She had tried everything. Extra shifts, selling her sketches, even applying for loans, all denied. And now she sat before a man whose wealth could erase every one of her problems, at a price. Alexander's voice cut through the silence, low and steady. "This marriage will last 1 year," he said, sliding the folder across the desk. "You will attend public events with me, wear the ring, and play the role of my wife. In return, your father's treatment will be fully covered, and you will receive a monthly allowance. When the contract ends, you walk away free." Claire's fingers trembled as she turned the pages. No affection in public, she read softly. No personal questions. No touching, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Her chest tightened. "So you are marrying me to keep up appearances." He met her eyes, dark and unreadable. "Appearances," he repeated, "are everything in my world, Miss Evans. This is not love, it is strategy." Claire swallowed hard. "And what if I refuse? Then you can leave," Alexander replied evenly. "But your father's surgery is next week, and I am the only one willing to pay for it." Silence filled the room again. The rain outside softened to a rhythm that almost sounded like a heartbeat. Claire's gaze fell on the signature line. Her pride screamed no, but desperation whispered louder. With a trembling hand, she picked up the pen. As the tip touched the paper, her mind echoed the last words of the nurse that morning. "Without the operation, he will not make it through the month." Her throat tightened. The pen scratched the paper. Claire Evans signed her name. Alexander closed the folder, stood, and extended his hand. "Welcome to your new life, Mrs. Reed." His tone was polite, formal, detached. Claire rose to shake his hand, but before her fingers reached his, he turned away, buttoning his jacket, as if sealing an invisible wall between them. "There will be no affection in public," he said without looking back. "Do not forget that rule." That night, Claire found herself standing in the marble foyer of his penthouse overlooking Manhattan. The city lights stretched endlessly below, but the room felt like a glass prison. On the grand piano sat a single envelope, her new schedule, her new role. She ran her fingers along the surface, trying to steady her breath. In the reflection of the window, she saw herself a poor artist in a borrowed silk dress, a woman who had just sold a year of her freedom. Alexander appeared behind her, his reflection tall and distant. "Tomorrow night," he said, "there is a charity gala. You will accompany me. Wear something appropriate." She nodded, too drained to speak. He paused, his voice softening for the briefest moment. "Do not look at it as punishment, Claire. Think of it as survival." When the elevator doors closed behind him, the echo of his footsteps lingered in the air. Claire exhaled shakily and whispered to herself, "Survival, right. But at what cost?" Outside, thunder rolled across the city skyline. Inside, 2 strangers had just bound their lives with ink and silence. One for power, one for love that had nowhere left to go. The next evening arrived with a quiet chill that wrapped the city in silver mist. Claire stood before the mirror in the guest room of Alexander's penthouse, trying to calm her trembling hands. The gown his assistant had sent earlier that day shimmered faintly under the light, beautiful and far too expensive for someone like her. She smoothed the fabric, whispered a breath to steady herself, and looked at the stranger reflected in the mirror. A woman pretending to belong in a world she had never stepped into before. At precisely 7:30, Alexander appeared at her door. He was dressed in a black tuxedo that fit him with effortless precision. His presence filled the room even before he spoke. "You are ready," he said, not asking but stating it as fact. "Yes," Claire answered quietly. He studied her for a moment, his gaze unreadable. "You look appropriate." A pause just long enough to make her unsure if it was a compliment or a calculation. "Thank you," she said softly. The ride to the charity gala was silent except for the soft hum of the car engine. Outside, Manhattan glittered like a field of diamonds. Claire kept her eyes on the lights, pretending not to feel the invisible distance between them. Alexander scrolled through his phone, his posture perfect, his mind clearly elsewhere. When the car stopped before the Grand Astoria Hotel, a line of photographers already waited under the marble archway. "Remember the rules," he said as the driver opened the door. "Smile. Say little. Do not touch me in public." His tone was calm, controlled, the same way he might address a new employee. Claire nodded and stepped out into the flash of cameras. The noise hit her like a wave. She forced a polite smile as Alexander placed a careful hand on the small of her back, guiding her forward close enough to look convincing, far enough to keep the boundaries intact. Inside, chandeliers sparkled above the crowd. Waiters moved like shadows between tables, and laughter mingled with the sound of crystal glasses. Everywhere she turned, eyes followed them. Claire could feel the weight of judgment, whispers of "who is she, where did she come from?" carried in every glance. She held her head high, remembering her promise to herself. "You are doing this for your father. Just 1 year." At the main table, Alexander greeted business partners with the same polished smile he wore in magazines. She sat quietly beside him, answering polite questions, keeping her voice steady. But when one of the guests, an older man with a kind face, began talking to her about art, her eyes lit up without her realizing it. "I used to paint," she said, "mostly cityscapes, but it has been a while." Her tone softened, her laughter gentle. For the first time that night, she looked alive. From across the table, Alexander glanced at her. The sight of her smiling, genuinely smiling with another man, stirred something he did not expect. A strange flicker of irritation crossed his features, quickly hidden behind his wine glass. When the man reached to show her a photo of his own art collection, their shoulders brushed lightly. It was an innocent touch, barely noticeable, but Alexander's jaw tightened. He leaned slightly closer and said under his breath, "Remember the rules, Mrs. Reed." Claire blinked, startled. "I was just appearances," he interrupted coldly. "Matter?" She nodded, the warmth draining from her face. For the rest of the evening she stayed quiet, answering no more than necessary. Later, as the gala ended, they stepped out into the cool night. The driver opened the car door, but Claire lingered for a moment under the hotel's glowing lights. She looked up at the city skyline and whispered, "You said no touching, but it feels like you are the one building walls no one can survive." Alexander froze for half a second, the words cutting deeper than he expected. He said nothing, only motioned for her to get in the car. The ride home was silent again, but this time the air between them carried something new, the faint pulse of emotions neither of them wanted to admit. When they reached the penthouse, Alexander walked ahead as usual. Claire followed, pausing at the glass balcony overlooking the city. The rain had returned, tapping softly against the windows. She placed a hand on the cold glass and whispered to herself, 1 year, I can survive 1 year. Behind her, Alexander stood in the doorway watching. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words never came. Instead, he turned away, retreating into the solitude of his study. That night, 2 people slept under the same roof yet felt miles apart. One fought to keep a promise made in desperation. The other fought against a heart that was beginning to betray him. Days turned into weeks. The marriage between Alexander and Claire settled into a rhythm that felt more like a business contract than a union. Every morning the sound of coffee brewing filled the penthouse, followed by the quiet footsteps of 2 strangers moving through the same space without ever truly meeting. Alexander left early, his schedule dictated by board meetings and investor calls. Claire spent most of her hours alone, reading in the sunroom or sketching by the balcony when the city lights began to glow. She never dared to overstep, never touched anything that was his, and never forgot the rules. One evening, while Alexander was working late in his study, she noticed a small stack of unopened mail by the foyer. One envelope caught her eye, her name written neatly in black ink. Inside was a letter from the hospital. Her father's surgery had gone well, but additional treatment would be required. Relief filled her eyes quickly, followed by worry. More money, more time. She folded the letter quietly, pressing it against her chest. Just 1 year, she whispered to herself. Just 1 year and he will be safe. That same night she knocked softly on Alexander's study door. "Come in," he said without looking up from his computer. She stepped inside, the warm glow of the desk lamp falling over his sharp features. His sleeves were rolled up, his tie gone, and for once he looked less like a machine and more like a man. "I just wanted to thank you," she began, "for helping my father." He finally looked at her, his eyes calm but unreadable. "You do not need to thank me. You are fulfilling your part of the deal." "I know," she said, voice small. Still, I wanted to say it. A silence hung between them. Then, without thinking, Claire reached into her pocket and took out a small folded cloth, a simple handkerchief, embroidered with faint blue thread. "This is for you," she said, placing it on his desk. "You work so much. You could use something that is yours." Alexander glanced at it, puzzled. "I already have plenty of those." "I know," she replied gently. "But this one is from someone who sees you as more than a contract." For a moment his eyes flickered, something softened there, a crack in the armor he always wore. But he covered it quickly. "Good night, Mrs. Reed." Claire smiled faintly and left, leaving the handkerchief on his desk. The next morning when she entered the dining room, the handkerchief was gone. A part of her wondered if he had thrown it away. Later that day, Alexander had a board meeting at the company's headquarters. The discussion dragged on, but his mind wandered. When one of his executives spilled coffee near his files, he instinctively reached into his jacket pocket and found the folded cloth still there. For the first time in years, he realized someone had given him something without expecting anything in return. That night he returned home earlier than usual. Claire was curled on the couch, sketchbook in her lap, the faint light from a nearby lamp outlining her hair. She looked up, surprised to see him. "You are home early," she said. "The meeting ended sooner than expected." He hesitated, then added, "The handkerchief. I kept it." She smiled, a genuine one this time. "I am glad." He sat across from her, loosening his tie. The air between them felt different, still careful but warmer. "What are you drawing?" he asked. "The view," she said, turning the sketchbook toward him. "It is beautiful but lonely. Like the city is shining for everyone except the people living in it." He studied the sketch, soft lines, graceful shadows, a reflection of the skyline that looked almost human. "You see too much," he murmured. "That is what artists do," she replied quietly. "We see what others hide." For a long moment they simply sat there, the silence no longer heavy but peaceful. Then Alexander stood, placing his hands in his pockets. "You should rest. Tomorrow we have another event to attend." When he left the room, Claire closed her sketchbook, her heart thudding softly. She could not name it, but something was changing. In his study, Alexander stared out at the city, the same lights she had drawn glowing far below. He touched the handkerchief in his pocket and felt an unfamiliar warmth spread through his chest. For years he had believed emotions were weaknesses, but tonight he was not so sure. As the clock ticked past midnight, two people under the same roof began to feel the first fragile thread of connection, forming delicate, unspoken, and real. A few days later, the quiet routine of their life began to shift. It started with small gestures that neither of them mentioned. Alexander began leaving his coffee cup beside a second mug in the mornings, one she could fill if she wished. Claire started cooking breakfast instead of waiting for the housekeeper. They never spoke of it, but it was the first sign that the distance between them was slowly narrowing. One afternoon, Alexander's assistant knocked on the study door and said, "Sir, the gala for the Children's Foundation is this Saturday. Your attendance is required. Would Mrs. Reed be joining you?" Alexander hesitated before replying, "Yes, she will." That evening he found Claire on the balcony sketching again. The city spread before her like an ocean of lights. "There is another event this weekend," he said. "A formal one. You should prepare something elegant." She turned, slightly surprised that he had come to tell her in person. "All right. Will it be the same crowd as before?" "Mostly," he said. "But this one matters more. My family's board members will be there." Claire nodded. "Then I will do my best not to embarrass you." Alexander's jaw tightened. "You never have." He left before she could respond, his own words echoing in his mind longer than he expected. When Saturday came, the ballroom at the Grand Meridian shimmered with chandeliers and gold. The theme of the night was New Beginnings, a charity dinner for orphaned children. The irony was not lost on Claire. She arrived in a midnight blue gown, simple but graceful. As soon as she entered conversation, paused for a moment, the poor artist from nowhere had learned how to carry herself like a woman of class. Alexander met her at the entrance. For a brief second his eyes lingered on her, a flicker of pride, breaking through the usual restraint. "You look perfect," he said quietly. "Appropriate," she teased, echoing his first compliment. He almost smiled. More than that, the evening unfolded like a carefully rehearsed play. Alexander introduced her to donors, investors, and reporters. Claire listened, spoke when needed, and smiled with the calm grace that came from quiet confidence. At one point, when a child from the foundation approached her with a small paper flower, she knelt down to accept it with genuine warmth. Cameras flashed as she thanked the boy. For the first time, Alexander saw what he had never truly noticed. She did not pretend. Her kindness was not for the crowd. It was real. Something inside him shifted. Later, as they stood near the edge of the dance floor, one of his old friends, Mark Benson, approached them. "Alexander, it has been too long," Mark said, shaking his hand. His gaze turned to Claire. "And you must be the wife we keep hearing about." Claire smiled politely. "It is nice to meet you." Mark chuckled. "You are more charming than he deserves." Then turning to Alexander, he added, "Do not be so tense, my friend. Let her enjoy the night. You might even try dancing with her." Alexander's lips curved slightly. "That would violate the contract, I am afraid." Claire blinked, caught off guard. The words were meant as humor, but they carried a sting. Mark laughed and excused himself, leaving them in silence. "Was that a joke?" she asked softly. "Yes," Alexander said, though his voice lacked conviction. "But perhaps a poor one." A new song began, slow and delicate. Around them, couples drifted to the dance floor. Claire watched them, then turned to him. "I do not need a dance," she said. "I just need to know you are not ashamed to be seen with me." His expression hardened for a second, then softened. "I am not ashamed," he said quietly. "I am afraid of what of forgetting this is not real." Before she could respond, a photographer approached. "Mr. Reed, Mrs. Reed, a photo, please." Alexander straightened, slipping back into his composed public mask. He placed his hand lightly on Claire's waist, careful, almost distant. The flash went off. She forced a small smile, but her chest ached. Hours later, as they returned home, the car was silent again. But the silence was heavier now, full of things neither dared to say. When they reached the penthouse, Claire turned before heading to her room. "You can keep pretending this is all business," she said quietly. "But I have seen you, Alexander. You are not as cold as you want to be." He did not answer. His eyes followed her as she disappeared down the hall, her words lingering like a quiet echo in the empty space. That night, Alexander stood by the window long after midnight, holding the paper flower the child had given her. He could not understand why he kept it, only that for the first time in years something small and fragile felt worth protecting. The following week brought a rare calm to their world. The gala had gone perfectly, and for once Alexander's name appeared in the headlines with warmth instead of scandal. Yet beneath the surface something deeper had shifted. He had begun to notice the small details about Claire that he had ignored before, the way she hummed softly while making tea, the quiet concentration on her face, when she sketched the kindness she showed even to the staff who barely spoke. English. Each morning he found himself watching her a little longer before leaving for work. He told himself it was curiosity, not affection. But he knew better. One evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, Alexander returned home early to find Claire on the rooftop garden. She was kneeling by a row of small plants, her hands covered in soil, her hair loose and caught by the wind. "You have a garden up here," she said as she noticed him. "I did not think you used it." "I do not," he replied, stepping closer. "It was my mother's idea. She believed something green should always be nearby, even in a world of steel." Claire smiled faintly. Then she was right. It feels alive up here. For a moment, silence settled between them, soft and calm. Then unexpectedly she reached out and brushed a leaf from his shoulder. It was a small, almost innocent gesture, but it broke the one rule that had defined them from the start. Alexander froze. Her hand lingered for only a heartbeat before she pulled back. "Sorry," she whispered. "Old habit." He looked at her, his voice low but firm. "Do not apologize for being human." The words surprised even him. She gave a small smile, eyes glimmering in the fading light. "That might be the first kind thing you have said to me." Before he could respond, his phone rang. It was his secretary. "Sir, there is an urgent issue with the Carter contract. The board needs your approval tonight." His jaw tightened. He turned slightly away. "I will handle it." When he looked back, the peace of the moment had slipped away. "I need to go." She nodded, masking her disappointment. Of course. Later that night, as Alexander sat in his car outside the office building, he could not focus on the papers in front of him. His thoughts kept returning to her hand, brushing his shoulder to the way her voice had softened when she spoke about his mother. When he finally returned home near midnight, he found the living room light still on. Claire had fallen asleep on the couch, her sketchbook open beside her. On the page was a half-finished drawing of him standing on the rooftop, surrounded by the small patch of green. He stared at it for a long time. Something in his chest tightened, something he could not name. He gently closed the sketchbook and placed a blanket over her. The next morning when she woke, the blanket was neatly folded at her side, and beside it was a note in his handwriting. "Thank you for reminding me that life can grow, even where it should not." For the first time since their marriage began, Claire smiled without pain. She pressed the note to her heart and whispered, "Maybe he is starting to remember how to feel." And high in his study, Alexander sat with the same note typed on his phone, unable to delete it, because deep down he already knew no rule or contract could protect him from what was happening inside his own heart. 2 days later, the fragile peace that had started to bloom between them was tested. Alexander had been away for meetings all day, and Claire spent the afternoon preparing a quiet dinner. She was not sure why she bothered. He rarely ate with her, but she wanted to try. When the clock struck 8 and he had not returned, she sat by the window watching the rain trace lines down the glass. When the elevator finally chimed, she rose quickly, smoothing her dress. Alexander stepped out, his expression unreadable, his shoulders heavy with the exhaustion of another endless day. "You are late," she said softly. He loosened his tie and sighed. The board delayed again. "It does not matter. I made dinner," she said. "You should eat something." He looked at the table, then at her. For a moment he seemed ready to decline, but the faint hope in her eyes stopped him. "All right," he said quietly. They sat across from each other in the warm light of the dining room. Claire served soup, the aroma gentle and comforting. For a while there was only the sound of spoons and rain. Then Alexander spoke. "You did not have to do this," he said. "I wanted to," she replied. "You take care of everything for everyone else. Someone should take care of you once in a while." The words hit him harder than he expected. He looked down, unable to answer. "Your mother," she continued softly. "She would have been proud of you, I think." He lifted his gaze sharply. "You do not know her." "No," she admitted. "But I know what kindness looks like. You hide it well, but it is still there." Alexander exhaled slowly. "Kindness is not a strength in my world, Claire. It is a weakness people exploit." "Maybe," she said. "But it is also what makes someone human." The silence that followed was not heavy this time. It was fragile, delicate, and real. Later that night, Alexander stood by the balcony staring out at the city lights. Claire joined him, holding 2 cups of tea. She handed one to him without a word. Their fingers brushed for a second, and neither of them pulled away. "I used to stand here alone every night," he said, "to remind myself that being alone was easier." "And now?" she asked. He hesitated, then said, "Now I am not so sure." For the first time, Claire saw something in his eyes she had never seen before: vulnerability. She wanted to speak, to tell him that she felt the same, but the words caught in her throat. The moment was interrupted by the sharp buzz of his phone. He glanced at the screen and his face darkened. "I have to take this," he said quickly, stepping away. When he disappeared into his office, Claire turned back to the city. She tried to ignore the growing ache in her chest. Every time they got close, something always pulled him back into his world of control and walls. Minutes turned into hours, and he never returned to the balcony. She eventually went to bed, the faint sound of his voice on the phone echoing through the hall. In his office, Alexander ended the call and sank into his chair. It had been a conversation with one of his old rivals, a man who had hinted at knowing more about Alexander's contract marriage. For the first time, fear struck him, not for his reputation, but for her. If the truth came out, she would be dragged into a world of headlines and judgment she did not deserve. He looked at the handkerchief, folded neatly on his desk, and whispered to himself, "What have I done to her?" Outside, the rain kept falling, washing the city clean, but not the guilt that had just begun to grow in Alexander Reed's heart. The following morning began with tension in the air. Claire noticed it the moment Alexander walked into the kitchen. His movements were sharper than usual, his voice lower, controlled. He poured his coffee without a word. "You did not sleep," she said quietly. He did not answer at first. "There is something I need to tell you," he finally said. Claire set down her cup. "What is it?" He met her gaze, and for the first time she saw something close to fear behind his calm. "Someone from the media has found out about our arrangement. They are threatening to publish it." Her breath caught. "You mean the contract?" "Yes." His tone hardened. "If that happens, everything I have built will be questioned. The company, my reputation, it will all be dragged through the mud." "And me?" she asked softly. He looked away. "You will be fine. They will move on." She gave a small, bitter laugh. "You really think the world will leave me alone? They will call me a liar, a gold digger, a woman who sold herself." "Claire, no," she interrupted, her voice trembling. "You made this deal, Alexander. You told me not to touch you in public, not to feel anything. But now I am the one who has to pay for it." He stepped closer. "I will handle it." "How?" "By pretending again, by hiding me like some mistake." His jaw tightened. "I am trying to protect you." "From what?" "From being seen with you, because that is all you ever do hide." The silence that followed was painful. Claire's eyes glistened, but she did not let the tears fall. "You think you are protecting me, but all you are really doing is protecting yourself." Before he could respond, her phone buzzed on the counter. It was a message from a journalist she did not know. "We have questions about your marriage to Mr. Reed. Care to comment?" Her heart sank. "It has already started," she whispered. Alexander took the phone from her gently and placed it face down. "I will fix this," he said again, his voice low and desperate. But she shook her head. "You cannot fix something that was never real to begin with." She turned away, walked down the hall, and closed her bedroom door. For a long time, Alexander stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the door she had disappeared behind. He wanted to chase her, to tell her that it had become real, that somewhere along the way the rules had broken, and he no longer knew where the act ended. But pride and fear kept him frozen. By evening she was gone. Her room was empty except for the folded blanket and the note she left behind on the nightstand. "I never wanted your money, Alexander. I only wanted to be seen." He read the words again and again until they blurred. For the first time in years, the man who had everything realized how little it meant when there was no one left to come home to. 2 days passed without a word from Claire. The penthouse felt empty, its silence echoing in every room. Alexander tried to focus on work, but every call, every meeting blurred into background noise. His thoughts kept returning to her note, "I only wanted to be seen." The words haunted him. When the first headline hit the news, his worst fears came true. Billionaire Alexander Reed's secret contract marriage exposed. Photographs from their gala appeared everywhere, twisted with rumors and speculation. Some called her an opportunist, others accused him of manipulation. But none of them knew the truth. Alexander closed his laptop and stood abruptly. Enough was enough. He grabbed his coat and keys and walked out into the cold night. He found her in the last place he expected, the small art studio downtown where she had once worked before their marriage. The faint scent of paint and turpentine lingered in the air. She was standing near the window, her hands stained with color, her hair tied back loosely. When she turned and saw him, she froze. "How did you find me?" "I never stopped looking," he said quietly. "I had to see you." She looked at him for a long moment. "You should not be here, Alexander. The press is tearing you apart." "They can have me," he replied. "I only care about you." Her expression wavered. "Do not say things you do not mean." "I mean every word," he said firmly. "You were right. I was hiding not from the world but from myself. I thought control would protect me, that distance would make me strong. But the truth is I was just afraid to feel anything real." Claire shook her head, tears gathering in her eyes. "It is too late. They have already destroyed what little peace I had." "Then let me help you rebuild it," he said, stepping closer. "Not as a contract, not as a performance, as the man who cannot stop thinking about you." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to forget the pain, the humiliation, the fear. "You do not understand," she whispered. "The world will never see me as your equal." He took her hand gently. "Then I will make them see. I will tell them the truth." Before she could protest, Alexander released her hand and pulled out his phone. Within minutes, a live broadcast began on every major network. Reporters watched as the billionaire they had mocked stood before the world. No script, no lawyer, no shield. "My name is Alexander Reed," he began, his voice steady but raw. "Yes, the marriage started as an agreement. But what began as a deal became the most honest thing in my life. Claire Evans did not use me. I was the one who used her, and in doing so I lost myself." He looked straight into the camera. "I love her. Not because she saved me, but because she showed me what it means to be human again." Back at the studio, Claire covered her mouth, tears falling freely. For the first time, the world saw him not as a CEO, but as a man willing to risk everything for the woman he loved. When he finally returned to her, there were no words left. She met him halfway across the room. He reached for her, hesitant at first, then certain. She did not pull away. For the first time, she touched him in public, and he did not let go. The next morning, the city woke to a different kind of headline. Alexander Reed admits truth behind contract marriage, public stands with Claire Evans. The tone had changed. What was once scandal had become something else, entirely a story about redemption and love that had defied power, pride, and fear. Alexander and Claire stayed hidden from the cameras for a while, retreating to a quiet cabin outside the city. For the first time since their wedding, there were no rules, no contracts, no expectations. Just silence, laughter, and the sound of rain tapping softly on the wooden roof. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Claire stood on the porch sketching the view. Alexander joined her, holding 2 cups of tea. "You always find beauty in simple things," he said. She smiled. "Maybe because I know what it feels like to live without it." He placed the cups down and reached into his pocket. When he opened his hand, she saw the same silver ring he had once given her on their wedding day, a symbol of an arrangement, not of love. "I kept this," he said, "but I do not want it to stand for a deal anymore." Claire's breath caught as he went down on one knee, the evening light catching in his eyes. "No contracts, no conditions, no pretending," Alexander said softly. "I am asking you to marry me again, not as a business partner, but as the woman I love. Will you?" For a moment, the world around them fell silent. Claire's eyes filled with tears. "You once forbade me to touch you," she whispered. "Now you are asking me to hold you forever." He smiled. "That is the only rule I will never break again." She nodded, unable to speak, and slipped the ring onto her finger. He rose and drew her close, their foreheads touching as the sky turned gold. Later, back in the city, the two of them reopened her art studio under a new name, the Reed Foundation for Hope, a place that helped young artists find their voice. Hanging in the center of the main room was one framed sketch, 2 hands reaching across a table, finally touching, and beneath it, written in simple ink, were the words Alexander once feared to say aloud: "Love is not control, it is surrender."